I was always the one who didn't need much. That's how they described me: low maintenance, easygoing, the good one. Camden had his spotlight team captain's straight white teeth and a grin that made our aunts melt. Tessa was the baby, dramatic and delicate, the kind of kid who got applauded just for showing up. And me, I was the middle, the buffer, the one who kept things from falling apart without anyone noticing I was holding the pieces. I remembered every birthday, even when they forgot mine. I learned how to braid Tessa's hair when Mom was too tired, and how to patch Camden's ripped jerseys when no one else could be bothered. I cleared dishes before being asked, offered rides without being thanked, and sat quietly in rooms where everyone else was too loud to hear anyone else. It didn't start out as resentment, just habit, then responsibility, eventually obligation. I told myself this was love, that showing up even when no one asked me to was how I stayed part of the family. I was 18 when Dad first asked if I could help with Camden's insurance after his accident. 20 when Tessa's laptop broke and they suggested I just cover it until they could figure it out. By 25, I had a growing business and a withering sense of boundaries. I was paying for Tessa's textbooks, sending monthly transfers to my parents just in case, and covering the cost of every family dinner because you're the one with the money now. But I still got the same seat at the table next to the drafty window next to the dishes no one cleared but me. It wasn't that I wanted applause, I just wanted them to notice, just once. But they didn't. They noticed Camden's promotions. They noticed Tessa's breakups. They noticed Mom's migraines and Dad's half-finished deck. They never noticed that I was the one who stayed behind after the parties, collecting cups and scraping leftovers into the bin. I thought maybe one day they'd say it, "Thank you for always showing up." But instead, what I got was a voicemail that would change everything. The first time I paid Camden's rent, I felt proud. He'd just moved out after his third attempt at a roommate situation imploded. He called me late at night, said he was short just this once until the new job stabilized. I wired it within the hour, no hesitation. I even added a little extra, told him to get takeout so he wouldn't have to stress about groceries that week. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. The next time came faster. He didn't bother explaining. Just sent the amount and a quick "appreciate it." I told myself that was enough, that the silence after giving was part of the job of being the strong one. Then came Tessa's tuition gap. Something about her scholarship not covering lab fees. I got a panicked call from her 2 days before the deadline. I paid it. And the next one. And the next one after that. At some point, my card was saved on her student portal. My parents were slower to ask, but more consistent. The roof leaked, the water heater broke, the dishwasher stopped working. My dad would grumble through a call about how things just aren't built the way they used to be, then trail off until I filled in the silence with "I can cover it." There were no thank yous, not even the small ones, just more needs. And I kept meeting them, thinking maybe gratitude lived in their comfort, that maybe showing up was enough even if no one said it out loud. But the moment I remember most wasn't a big ask. It was small, almost forgettable. My birthday, 30 years old. No call, no card, no flowers. Just a single text from my mom at 3:17 p.m. "Can you Venmo me $80 grocery store?" was more than I thought. I sent it. Then I sat on my kitchen floor with the cake I bought myself and realized I hadn't heard anyone say the words "happy birthday" out loud that day. That night, I lit one candle and didn't make a wish. I just sat there letting the silence pile up like snow around me and wondered what it would take for them to notice if I stopped showing up altogether. Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. My house, my table, my rules. I spent weeks planning it, booked a caterer, hired someone to deep clean the guest bathroom, even bought matching wine glasses for the first time in my life. I wanted them to feel proud. Maybe if I gave them something beautiful, they'd finally see me differently. They arrived late, of course. Tessa walked in first AirPods and scrolling through her phone as if the whole event was background noise. Camden followed, calling from the hallway, "Do you have oat milk?" as if I were the hostess of a trendy cafe and not his sister. My parents came last. My dad handed me a lukewarm pie he picked up from the grocery store. My mom walked past me without a word and started rearranging my centerpiece. Dinner looked like something out of a magazine. The table glowed with warm lights, the food was plated perfectly, and the fire pit in the backyard flickered just enough to make it feel special. But nobody noticed. No one offered to help set the table. or clear it, or even ask how I pulled it off. When Camden stood up for the toast, he smiled and said, "It's good to be together again, no matter what this family shows up for each other." He raised his glass, and everyone nodded like he'd just solved world peace. Not one word about who paid for the catering. Not one word about the person who made sure it all happened. I waited for something, a glance, a whisper of acknowledgement. It never came. Later that night, I stood by the fire pit alone, the last logs burning low smoke curling around my sleeves. My dad walked past me with a sigh, looked at the setup, and muttered, "You millennials have it easy," before heading back inside. That was the moment I knew. I could give them everything money, time, energy, and it would still never register. To them, it was just what I did, just who I was. A reliable current they never bothered to thank until the power went out. 2 months later, it did. It was a Tuesday, late. I had just gotten home from back-to-back meetings, the kind of day where my voice was hoarse and my legs ached from standing too long. I tossed my keys into the bowl by the door, slipped off my shoes, and noticed the blinking light on my phone. One voicemail. I didn't recognize the number at first, but the voice was unmistakable. My father. Clipped tight like he'd rehearsed the anger before dialing. "All you do is take. You've never given this family anything worth remembering. If you had any pride, you'd stop acting like we owe you something and just leave." I stood there frozen, the air still wrapped around me from outside. I replayed it once, then again. His words hid in waves, first confusion, then disbelief, then something deeper. Not rage, not sadness, just fatigue. I didn't call back. I didn't argue or explain. Instead, I walked to my laptop, opened the browser, and began the quiet process of undoing. The recurring payments to Tessa's college paused. The auto transfer for Camden's utilities canceled. The monthly deposit I made into my parents' emergency fund closed. No announcement, no dramatic farewell, just clean lines drawn in silence. Before I shut my phone for the night, I sent one message. To Tessa. Thought I never gave this family anything. No emojis, no punctuation. She didn't respond, at least not right away. And neither did anyone else. 3 days passed, then a week. Nothing. I went about my days like I always had: meetings, projects, early mornings, late emails. But something felt lighter, like I had been holding a rope for so long that I forgot how much it burned until I finally let go. It took almost a full month for the silence to crack. And when it did, it came as a shaky voice late one Friday night, asking why her tuition hadn't cleared. It started small. A missed call from Tessa at 11:42 p.m. I didn't answer. Then 2 texts back to back. "Hey, I just logged into my school portal. My tuition didn't go through. Is something wrong with the account? Can you check, please?" I turned my phone face down and went back to watching the snow fall through the cafe window. I'd been in Denver for 3 days. I hadn't told anyone I was going. I'd booked the flight in silence, packed a bag in 20 minutes, and left before sunrise. No return date, just space. The next day, Camden left me a voicemail. His voice was clipped, frustrated. "Serena, the car's been towed. I thought we had a deal. I just need a couple hundred to get it back. Call me." We never had a deal. We had a pattern. By the end of the week, I had missed 9 calls from my mother. One voicemail stood out. The bank's saying the mortgage payment didn't clear. Did something change with the setup? Yes, everything changed. I sat in that same corner seat at the cafe every morning sipping coffee. I didn't rush journaling in a notebook that still smelled like the bookstore I bought it from. The world didn't fall apart. In fact, it got quieter in a way I hadn't known I needed. I slept better, ate slower, walked without glancing at my phone every 3 steps. The silence back home cracked louder each day. My father's tone shifted from annoyed to alarmed. Tessa texted again this time without pretense. "Please, I'll lose my scholarship if I get dropped this semester." I still didn't answer. What they never realized was that I hadn't left out of anger. I left because I was done giving pieces of myself to people who only felt my worth when they were in crisis. They weren't calling because they missed me. They were calling because their safety net was gone. And by the time they understood that I was already watching the sunrise over the mountains, breathing in a version of peace I hadn't known was possible. Noelle was the only one who never asked for anything. She didn't take sides, didn't gossip, just sent me a message that read, "You need to see this. Sorry." Then a link. I hesitated before clicking, but curiosity won. It led to a Reddit post anonymous under a throwaway account, but unmistakably Tessa. The writing was her voice, even in its most performative form. The title was dramatic. My family fell apart, and now I might lose everything. The story painted her as the victim of a sudden breakdown. Her sister, once generous and kind, had apparently become erratic, resentful, and withdrawn. She claimed I had ghosted the family, pulled out funding without warning, and abandoned them during a critical time. Strangers were commenting, offering sympathy. Some were even donating. There was a linked GoFundMe with $6,000 already raised. I didn't get angry, just tired. I opened a folder on my desktop one I had quietly kept over the years. Labeled receipts, wire confirmations, tuition screenshots, textbook reimbursements. $94,000 total across 6 years. I compiled them into a private image album. No names, no dramatic captions, just dates, amounts, and transactions. Then I logged into Reddit and posted one comment beneath her story. "Before you donate, maybe ask where the other $94,000 went." That was it. No flames, no accusations. Within hours, the thread exploded. A few users started asking questions. Someone found a past post that contradicted her claims. The donations slowed. By the next day, the post was flagged for suspicious fundraising activity and removed. Noelle messaged me again that night. "You didn't deserve that. Just so you know, some of us have always seen the full picture." I stared at her words longer than I expected to. Not because I needed validation, but because I hadn't realized how much I'd been waiting for anyone to say that out loud. It didn't undo the damage, but it did something quieter. It reminded me that not every silence was empty. Some were simply waiting to be filled with the right kind of truth. And now that truth was finally catching up to them. I had almost forgotten about the lake house. It came up in a passing thought while I was closing old accounts, just a line item in my budget-labeled property taxes. I pulled up the paperwork. My name was still on the deed. Sole owner. No shared stake. I'd paid for it outright 4 summers ago, back when Dad said he wanted something for the whole family. He promised it would be our shared legacy. But the only legacy it ever became was theirs. I flew home on a Sunday morning. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I rented a car, drove straight from the airport to the house I grew up in. The yard was overgrown. Camden's old truck sat in the driveway, dust-coated as if it hadn't moved in weeks. I still had a key. My mom had forgotten to collect it the last time I visited. The lock clicked like muscle memory, and I stepped inside to the sound of voices coming from the living room. I paused just out of sight and listened. "She's being dramatic," Camden was saying. "She'll come crawling back once she gets over herself." "I just don't get why she's doing this," Tessa added, her voice low. "It's not like she needs the money." Then my father's voice, unmistakable. "Serena's always been the weak one, hiding behind her work, acting like she's special just because she has a bank account. No one pushed back. No one defended me. They were so sure I wasn't there, so sure I wouldn't hear them. I didn't cry. I didn't walk in to confront them. I just stood still, letting their words settle into something solid. Confirmation, not surprise. Then I turned toward the hallway past the kitchen and stopped in front of the gallery wall that used to be covered in family photos. Most of them were new beach vacations, graduations, birthdays. There was a framed picture from Thanksgiving 2 years ago. The one I hosted. I'd paid for the photographer, the food, the decor. And there they were, smiling in matching sweaters, raising glasses around my table. I wasn't in the photo. I stood there for a long time, not because I was hurt, but because it was finally so clear. I reached up, flipped the frame face down, and walked out without a sound. Then I drove straight to the lake house. The morning of the auction, I parked across the street and sat in the car for a while, watching the clouds shift above the old roof line. The notice of foreclosure sign was already staked into the lawn. The front door was propped open, and I could see Daniel inside, clipboard in hand, speaking with the rep from the auction company. I stepped out quietly. I didn't need to be there, not technically, but I wanted to be. Not for vengeance, for witness. People started arriving, curious neighbors, a few serious bidders, a couple looking for a retirement property, and then my family pulled up. They piled out of Dad's Chevy like they had somewhere else to be. Camden saw me first. His jaw clenched. Tessa had her sunglasses on, but her eyes were red. My mom looked like she hadn't slept. Dad headed straight toward me, posture stiff. "You really doing this?" he said, voice sharp. "I am," I said calmly. "You're going to humiliate your own family over what some misunderstanding you think this makes you strong?" "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm just finally choosing me." Tessa's voice cracked. "Serena, please. I dropped 2 classes already. I don't even know if I can enroll next semester." I turned to her. "I paid for 3 years, Tessa. Every bill, every textbook. You never said thank you. Not once." Camden stepped forward. "You could have said something. Given us a warning." I looked him straight in the eye. "I did. You just never listened. The auctioneer called for attention. We'll begin in 5 minutes." My dad shook his head. "You think this house means something without us?" "No," I said. "That's why I'm letting it go." I walked past them and into the house one last time, signed the paperwork, handed Daniel the keys. I didn't linger. When I stepped back outside, the family that once expected me to hold them together stood motionless on the porch like they couldn't figure out how to exist without the version of me they'd always depended on. But I kept walking. By that afternoon, the house belonged to someone else. I moved to Chicago 2 weeks after the sale. No dramatic announcement. No fresh start proclamation. Just a quiet lease on a modest loft near the river, big enough for me and small enough to feel mine. There were no auto payments tied to anyone else's name. No forgotten birthdays to compensate for. No texts asking, "Can you cover this just one more time?" The quiet didn't echo. It softened. Most mornings I made tea and watched the streetcar pass below. I read books slowly, walked without headphones. Sometimes I forgot my phone for hours and didn't panic. The weight that used to press against my chest like a fist finally loosened. There was nothing to brace for. The calls stopped after the auction. A few guilt-laced voicemails came in that first week, but I didn't listen to them. I blocked every number one by one, and eventually the silence held. Then, one morning, an email. "Subject, I get it now." From Tessa. It was short. No excuses. Just, "I understand now. I'm sorry for what I said and what I let them say. You didn't deserve any of it." I read it twice. Then again. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, not even out of pride. Just clarity. I didn't need her to understand anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to say sorry so I could begin healing. I had already started. Some apologies don't open doors, they close them gently. I clicked archive and watched the screen go still. That afternoon, I walked to the lake, stood near the water, and let the wind thread through my sleeves. The air smelled clean. Not new, but earned. And for the first time in years, I didn't wonder what they were doing or whether they were still talking about me. I just stood there, breathing, finally belonging to myself again. And when I got home, I knew exactly what I wanted to do next. I took what was left of the college fund, the account that had once been set aside for Tessa's final year, and redirected it. The nonprofit was small, tucked into a corner of the city focused on scholarships for first-generation women in tech, the kind of girls who reminded me of myself before the weight of expectation blurred the lines between support and sacrifice. I didn't put my name on anything, no plaque, no announcement, just a quiet transfer with a note that said, "For the ones who won't have to explain why they matter." Back at my loft, I cleared a space on the bookshelf. I framed an old photo Noelle had once sent me us at age 9, aprons, crooked faces, smeared with flour mid-laugh over a batch of burnt cookies. Next to it, I wrote one line on a torn piece of cardstock: "Some family is chosen, some peace is earned." I slid it into the frame and stepped back, not to admire it, but to feel the stillness of it. It didn't take much space, but it finally felt like mine, and I never sent another dollar their way again.